The Milwaukee Bucks have reached a crossroads, and the clock is ticking men. According to reports, the organization wants clarity on Giannis Antetokounmpo's future before the NBA draft, which means they have roughly 1 week to make one of the biggest decisions in franchise history. For years, the idea of Giannis getting traded felt impossible. Now, it feels more realistic than ever. The key detail is that Giannis has not officially requested a trade. However, he also hasn't fully committed to Milwaukee's long-term future. If he chooses not to sign an extension, the Bucks could be heading into next season with free agency looming over everything. That might sound manageable, but from Milwaukee's perspective, it's a massive gamble. Giannis would have all the leverage, all the flexibility, and every possible option available to him. The Bucks, meanwhile, would be risking the nightmare scenario of watching their franchise icon walk away for nothing if another disappointing season unfolds. That is why Milwaukee appears ready to force the issue. They need an answer. Either Giannis is fully invested in the future of the franchise, or the organization may have to seriously consider moving on while his value remains sky high. As painful as that sounds, losing him without getting assets back would be even worse. The first team that immediately enters the conversation is the Boston Celtics. On paper, Jaylen Brown is the obvious centerpiece of any potential deal. He's an elite two-way player, an NBA champion, and one of the league's best wings. But if Milwaukee decides to trade Giannis, it probably won't be because they want to build around a veteran star already in the middle of his prime. The Bucks would likely be looking for younger talent, draft picks, and long-term assets that can help reshape the franchise. That's where the challenge begins. Boston doesn't have a treasure chest of draft picks waiting to be moved. As a result, any realistic Giannis trade likely requires a third or even fourth team. Atlanta continues to be mentioned because of Jaylen Brown's ties to the city. While teams like Houston and Portland could also help provide the young players and picks Milwaukee would want in return. There is another path though. The Bucks could acquire Brown and later flip him for additional assets. It's complicated, but it could work. And if Boston somehow pulls everything together, Giannis would immediately join one of the strongest situations in basketball. Alongside Jason Tatum, Derek White, Joe Mazzulla, elite defense, proven shooting, and championship experience, it may be his clearest path to another title. If you enjoy NBA rumors, trade breakdowns, and deep dives into the biggest stories around the league, make sure to subscribe and join the channel because this Giannis situation is moving fast, and the next few days could completely change the NBA landscape. One of the biggest reasons Boston keeps coming up in Giannis discussions is because he fills a problem they've been trying to solve for years: rim pressure. The Celtics are always near the top of the league in three-point shooting, but their playoff loss to Philadelphia exposed a major weakness. When the game slowed down, they didn't consistently have someone who could relentlessly attack the basket and force defenses to collapse. Giannis is arguably the best rim pressure player in basketball, which is why this potential move is being taken more seriously than ever. The rumors are also getting louder. Bill Simmons went from dismissing the possibility to suggesting Boston may have been hiding its true interest. Now, he's saying he expects the Celtics to seriously pursue Giannis and believes an offer is already on the table. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it does show that league insiders are treating this as a legitimate possibility rather than a fantasy scenario. Still, there are real basketball questions that people seem to be overlooking. The biggest one is simple: what position would Giannis actually play? During his best years in Milwaukee, Giannis benefited from having Brook Lopez behind him. Lopez handled the toughest center matchups, protected the rim, and stretched the floor offensively. That setup allowed Giannis to play as a roaming defender, flying around the court, helping everywhere, and creating chaos on defense. That's where he's often looked most dominant. Boston may not be able to give him that same luxury if Giannis lands. With the Celtics, there's a strong chance he spends most of his time at center. That sounds great on paper, but it's physically demanding over a long season. Giannis already carries a massive offensive workload. He's constantly attacking the rim, absorbing contact, and playing one of the most aggressive styles in the league. Asking him to do all of that while also battling centers every night is a different challenge entirely. There are offensive questions too. Giannis is at his best with the ball in his hands. So is Jason Tatum. Both players can adapt, and both are talented enough to make it work, but blending two superstars is rarely as simple as plugging names into a lineup. The talent would be undeniable, but the fit may not be quite as seamless as many people are making it sound. Jason Tatum and Giannis Antetokounmpo are talented enough to make almost any partnership work. If those two ended up on the same team, most people people would expect them to figure things out eventually, but that doesn't mean the fit would be completely seamless. There would be moments where Giannis spends more time off the ball than he's used to, and there would probably be stretches where Tatum has to sacrifice touches as well. Even so, Boston still feels like the strongest basketball destination if the Celtics can somehow solve the asset problem. And that's the catch. Finding a team willing to take on Jaylen Brown while sending Milwaukee the young players and draft picks they really want is still the biggest obstacle standing in the way of a deal. The next team that always comes up in these conversations is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and from a pure basketball standpoint, this might be the most exciting option of them all. If Milwaukee is sending away Giannis, it's hard to imagine Jaden McDaniels not being part of the return package. From there, you're probably discussing Julius Randle, draft picks, and potentially even more pieces. Naz Reid could become part of the conversation as well, while Minnesota might have to explore additional moves to increase the value of its offer. That's where things start getting messy. The entire dream revolves around pairing Giannis with Anthony Edwards. The problem is that every player Minnesota includes in the deal weakens the team Giannis would be joining. It's a difficult balancing act. You want to land a superstar, but you don't want to strip away the supporting cast that makes the team dangerous in the first place. Still, the vision is incredible. A Giannis and Anthony Edwards partnership would be absolutely terrifying. The speed, athleticism, defense, transition scoring, and constant pressure on the rim would give opponents nightmares. On paper, it could become the best superstar duo in the NBA. The issue is whether Minnesota can make the trade without leaving the roster too thin afterward. Then there's the Miami Heat. Unlike some of the other teams, Miami actually has a fairly straightforward package. Tyler Herro, Kel'el Ware, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and additional assets would likely form the foundation of any offer. Milwaukee could even choose to flip Herro later for more picks and younger talent if that's the direction they wanted to go. The problem is that while Miami's package is real, it doesn't feel overwhelming. For a player of Giannis's caliber, the return feels a little light compared to what Milwaukee would ideally want. And from Giannis's perspective, there's another concern. After giving up so many assets to acquire him, what exactly would be left around him? That's where the Miami scenario starts to get a lot less appealing. Defensively, the fit makes sense, but when you look beyond that, there are plenty of questions that still need answers. From a defensive standpoint, the Miami Heat idea is easy to understand. Pairing Giannis Antetokounmpo with Bam Adebayo would create one of the most terrifying defensive front courts the NBA has ever seen. Both players can switch onto guards, protect the rim, cover huge amounts of ground, and disrupt offenses in ways very few teams can match. Opponents would have a nightmare trying to score inside against that combination. The problem is everything that happens on the other end of the floor. If Miami sends out the assets required to land Giannis, the remaining roster starts looking pretty thin. You could be looking at a core built around players like Davion Mitchell, Pele Larson, Giannis, and Bam. At that point, the biggest question becomes obvious. Where is the spacing? Giannis is at his most dangerous when surrounded by shooters who force defenses to stay honest. Without that spacing, the floor shrinks, driving lanes disappear, and his job becomes significantly harder. That's what makes this fit so tricky. Even during Milwaukee's disappointing season, the Bucks remained one of the better shooting teams in the league. Miami, meanwhile, struggled from deep, and that's before potentially trading away Tyler Herro, arguably their best shooter, and Kel'el Ware, who has shown real promise as a floor spacing big man. Ironically, those are exactly the kinds of players Giannis needs around him, yet they're also the players Miami would likely have to sacrifice to acquire him. So just like Minnesota, the Heat face the same challenge. They can get Giannis, but they might have to strip away too much of the supporting cast in the process. If Giannis is leaving Milwaukee to improve his situation, joining another roster with major flaws doesn't make a lot of sense. Which brings us to the final option, staying in Milwaukee. From a championship perspective, the Bucks may not offer the clearest path forward. Their roster has questions, their window isn't as wide as it once was, and competing for another title won't be easy. But there is something Milwaukee can offer that no other team can. Legacy. Giannis has already accomplished what every superstar dreams about. He delivered a championship, won Finals MVP, dropped 50 points in a title-clinching game, and gave Milwaukee its first championship in half a century. His place in franchise history is undeniable. untouchable. That's why the Dirk Nowitzki comparison makes so much sense. Dirk stayed in Dallas after reaching the top, even when the years that followed weren't always pretty, yet nobody remembers those seasons nearly as much as they remember what he accomplished. Giannis has already earned that kind of respect. If he stays, his legacy only grows stronger. If he leaves, nobody will accuse him of failing Milwaukee. He already brought the city a championship. The only real question is whether another destination truly offers something better than what he already built. At the end of the day, everything comes down to one simple question. Does leaving actually make Giannis better off? If he gets traded, joins a new team, and wins another championship, then the decision speaks for itself. Nobody will question it. But if he leaves Milwaukee, the new team has to empty its roster to acquire him. The fit becomes awkward, and the results aren't any better. Then the conversation changes very quickly. At that point, nobody would be debating whether Giannis had the right to leave. He's already earned that right. He delivered a championship, brought Milwaukee back to the top, and cemented himself as the greatest player in franchise history. The real question would be whether the move actually solved anything. And when you look closely at some of the rumored destinations, that's far from guaranteed. From Milwaukee's perspective, the situation isn't exactly pretty either. The Bucks have burned through a huge amount of draft capital over the years. Several key assets are gone, and the Damian Lillard gamble never produced the results they hoped for. Building around a top 5 player is difficult enough without having limited flexibility to improve the roster. Still, there are a few reasons for optimism. Maybe Miles Turner looks much better after a full offseason with the team. Maybe Ryan Rollins takes another leap. Maybe Milwaukee finds a hidden gem with the 10th overall pick. Maybe the front office uncovers one more move that changes the direction of the franchise. None of those outcomes are impossible, but they do require a lot of things to go right. The biggest risk, however, is waiting too long. Giannis remains one of the best players in basketball, but injuries have interrupted several recent seasons. If Milwaukee delays a decision and another injury-shortened year follows, his trade value may never be higher than it is right now. That's why the Bucks appear ready to force clarity. Either Giannis commits fully to the future and remains the face of the franchise for life, or Milwaukee finally begins preparing for a breakup that could completely reshape the NBA landscape.